welcome back to whispers in the dark. Settle in, keep the lights low, and listen carefully. This is a story about fields that remember, about old things made by human hands that learned to hate the hands that made them, and about a lonely road where no one should ever stop after sunset. The road into Blackbriar Valley was the kind that seemed to fold the world closed behind you. It ran between miles of dead corn, through fields gone gray with frost and neglect, past leaning fences and stagnant ditches where cattails shivered in the wind like hands brushing against one another in prayer. Nothing grew right in that valley anymore, at least not anything meant for people. The locals in the nearest town said the earth there had soured years ago. They said the soil had gone mean. They said the crows would not land in those fields for long, and the dogs that wandered too far and never came back the same, if they came back at all. Most people laughed when they said it, but only with their mouths. Their eyes stayed serious. Mara Ellison noticed that the first time she stopped at Harlan's Market for gas and coffee. The old men on the porch looked at her packed car, the camera cases in the back seat, the sleeping bag, the flashlights, the cooler full of bottled water, and then at the county map spread across her dashboard. One of them, a stooped man in overalls with tobacco stains on his beard, asked where she was headed. She told him she was documenting abandoned rural properties for her channel, and for a magazine piece she hoped to pitch later. Forgotten houses, old churches, farms swallowed by weeds, places with history, places people left behind. When she said the last part, his expression changed. People leave places for reasons, he said. Mara smiled politely. She had heard the same kind of warning in a dozen counties across 3 states. Every abandoned place had a legend attached to it. Every town had its haunted bridge, its phantom widow, its blood-stained barn. Most of the time, the stories were little more than local sport, a way to keep outsiders entertained and teenagers nervous. "I am just going to take photographs," she said. "Maybe camp one night if the weather holds." The old man looked at the map. His finger, cracked and yellowed at the nail, hovered over a square of land near the valley's center. "Not there," he said. "That the Briar Farm." No one else on the porch spoke. The wind seemed to draw tighter around the building. The old man nodded once. "That field has a watcher in it." Mara expected a grin after that, some wink to let her know he was leaning into the myth. Instead, he just stared at her, deeply tired and deeply certain. "Used to be 2 brothers worked that land," he said. "Mean men, cruel for the joy of it. They built a scarecrow from fence posts and butcher's twine and dressed it in old Sunday clothes. Gave it a sack face, called it by a name I have no mind to repeat while the sun is slipping down. They mocked it, hid it, cursed it, told it everything black in their hearts. Then one autumn a storm came through and the brothers were found wrong. One peeled open on the hayloft floor, the other up in the field, with his hide hanging from the fence like wet laundry. One of the other old men muttered, "Tell her the rest." The stooped man did not take his eyes off Mara. They tore the farm down after that fire in 78. House burned, barn burned, silo cracked clean through. But the field never stayed empty. Folks pass that road late and say there is always something standing out there again, no matter how many times it gets knocked down. Something with a bent hat and a patient look to it. Something waiting. Mara thanked him for the story, bought her coffee, and drove out anyway. The truth was she liked places with stories attached. Stories made photographs more interesting. Stories drew viewers. And beyond that, she had always been the kind of person who pushed toward what unsettled her, not away from it. Fear had texture. It made the skin feel bright and alive. She chased that feeling through abandoned hospitals and decaying motels, through mine tunnels and shuttered schools, through moonless woods where old houses sat like rotten teeth in the dark. By the time she turned off the paved road and onto the narrow gravel lane leading into Blackbriar Valley, the late afternoon sun had flattened into a tarnished copper disk behind layers of dirty cloud. The world looked old. Not quaint old, not nostalgic old, something harsher than that. It looked used up. She drove slowly, crunching over stone and broken twigs, passing sections of fence swallowed by thorn bushes. Here and there old farm equipment lay half buried in grass. A rusted plow, a wagon wheel, the stripped shell of a tractor whose seat had rotted into black curls. She rolled her window down for air and immediately smelled mud, stagnant water, and the sickly sweet odor of vegetation gone to slime. Then came something else, a faint animal smell, dry, sour, dusty, like old feathers and old cloth kept too long in a sealed trunk. The Briar farm sat at the far end of the lane, or what was left of it. The house was gone, except for a low rectangle of stone foundation sunk into weeds. The barn was a blackened skeleton of support beams and collapsed roofing, all half strangled by vines. The field beyond spread wide and pale under the evening sky, corn stubble jutting from the earth like broken yellow teeth, and near the middle of it stood a scarecrow. Mara stopped the car and stared. It was taller than any scarecrow had a right to be, close to 7 feet if the crossbeam was mounted where she thought it was. It wore a frayed black coat that flapped in the wind like ragged wings. One sleeve hung limp because the arm beneath had partially split and drooped lower than the other. Its head was wrapped in a burlap sack stained dark around the mouth area, though there was no painted face she could see from the road. A wide-brimmed hat sat on top of it, sagging with damp, straw pushed from the cuffs, and neck in dirty, matted bundles. It was facing her car. That was not unusual in itself. Whoever built it could have angled it toward the lane to deter birds from the road. Yet the sight of it made the back of her neck prickle. Something about its stillness felt deliberate, not passive, not vacant, watchful. She reached for her camera. Through the lens, the scarecrow looked worse. The coat was not merely old. It was stiff and cracked with something dark, as if it had been soaked and dried soaked again many times over. The burlap over the face was sewn shut along one side with coarse black thread that resembled old surgical stitching. The hat brim cast a shadow over where its eyes should have been, but Mara had the uncanny sense that if she zoomed just a little closer, she would find the hollows underneath full and focused directly at her. The shutter clicked. At that exact moment, a gust of wind ran over the field. The corn stubble hissed softly. The weeds by the foundation bowed. The scarecrow's coat lifted and snapped, and for one impossible second Mara thought she saw the thing beneath it swell, as if lungs hidden inside a body of straw had pulled in a slow breath. She lowered the camera and laughed nervously at herself. "You need sleep," she murmured. There was still enough light to scout the place, so she parked near the ruined foundation and began unloading gear. She set up a small camp stove, a folding chair, and a lantern. She pitched her one-person tent on the least muddy patch she could find beside the old house footprint. She took photographs of the foundation stones, the burnt beams, the lane vanishing into thorn and shadow, and the field where the scarecrow stood crooked against the dying light. Twice while she worked, she glanced up and felt the strange certainty that the thing had shifted. Not much, only inches, but its posture never seemed quite what she remembered. By full dusk, the valley had turned cavernous. The clouds smothered the moon. Darkness flooded the fields so completely that the narrow circle of her lantern looked like the last light left in the world. Mara ate instant noodles from a metal cup and listened to the night settle around her. No crickets, no owls, no frogs in the ditch, just wind moving in uneven breaths through dead stalks and ruined wood. At 9, she recorded a few voice notes into her phone for the project. Camped at the Briar property. House burned down decades ago. Barn mostly gone. There is a scarecrow still standing in the north field. Possibly local kids made it, or some neighboring farmer put it up. Atmosphere here is intense. Strong visual location. There is almost no animal sound at all. Her voice sounded too loud. She ended the note and looked toward the field. The scarecrow was difficult to see now. It was only a darker seam in the dark. But as her eyes adjusted, the shape gathered itself. The hat, the shoulders, the long arm on the right, the lower drooping arm on the left. It stood closer than before. Mara went cold. She stood up from the chair so suddenly it tipped backward into the dirt. The lantern swung in her hand, making the shadows lurch. The scarecrow remained motionless, but she knew it was nearer the edge of the field. There was no mistake. She could see more of it now. More detail, more coat. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, though she did not know whether she meant her imagination or the thing. She took the lantern and walked toward the field. The earth sucked at her boots. Dry stalks scraped her jeans. When she reached the edge of the field and lifted the lantern high, the scarecrow stood perhaps 30 yards away, its post thrust into the ground at a slight angle. She could not be sure where it had been earlier, Not in the failing light, not exactly. But she felt foolish all the same. She had let a children's tale and too much dark space get under her skin. Then she saw what hung from one of its sleeves. Not straw, something pale. A strip of fabric, she thought first. Some rag snagged in the cuff. But the strip was too irregular, too organic in the way it narrowed and frayed. She stepped closer, raising the lantern again. The strip had fingernails. It was a hand, not a full hand. Only skin from a hand, peeled away in one grisly piece, the fingers elongated and empty, fluttering faintly in the wind like the cast-off glove of a dead thing. Mara stumbled backward so hard she nearly fell. Her mind rejected what she was seeing. It searched desperately for alternatives. Animal hide, old leather, some kind of prank. But there, unmistakable at the tip of one finger, was a chipped pink nail with a crescent of old glitter polish. Human, fresh enough to still shine wetly in the lantern light. The scream froze in her throat because another realization struck even harder. The hand skin was not hanging from the scarecrow's sleeve. It was tied there, as if someone had decorated it. Mara ran. She did not remember reaching camp. 1 second, the field was reeling around her, the lantern throwing jagged shadows across the rows. And the next, she was at her car, with the door yanked open. Hands shaking so badly, she dropped the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. The engine turned over and died. Come on, come on, come on. Again, a cough, a grinding choke. Dead. Her breath came thin and sharp. She grabbed her phone. No signal, not even one flickering bar. She tried anyway. Emergency call only. Then nothing. The valley seemed to lean inward, listening. She locked the car doors and turned on the interior light. Her camera bag sat on the passenger seat. The memory cards were inside. The photographs. Proof. If she could just make it back to town, if she could show someone, if she could get to a road with service. Something tapped the rear windshield. Mara whipped around. Nothing but darkness beyond the glass. Another tap. Higher this time. A dry, patient little knock. She hit the horn. The sound burst out savage and obscene in the silence, echoing across the field. And abruptly, the tapping stopped. She held the horn down, sobbing breaths tearing through her chest, until the engine battery sagged and the note weakened. The interior light flickered, then went out. For a long moment, there was no sound at all. Then from somewhere behind the car came a scraping drag, as though wood were being pulled slowly over gravel. Mara flattened herself against the front seat and peered into the rearview mirror. A shape passed behind the vehicle. Tall, crooked, wrapped in a black coat that moved without any breeze she could feel. It paused beside the trunk. A hand, or something built to mimic one, slid across the back window. Straw bristled from the wrist. Long, rusty nails dragged with a sound like knives over bark. Under the brim of the hat, pressed close to the glass, was the burlap face. There were no painted eyes. There were 2 wet holes cut where eyes should be, and something pale and slick glimmered within them. Human eyes, many human eyes, not arranged naturally, set too deep and too numerous, as if they had been pushed into the head from inside and had not all found the same place to settle. They shifted against the burlap, each looking in a different direction, each filmed over, but still terribly alive. Mara shrieked. The scarecrow tilted its head. A seam in the burlap mouth twitched upward. Not a real mouth, but a slit where black thread had once cinched the sack together. The threads were broken now. Beneath them, she glimpsed packed straw blackened with old blood and strips of something pink and fibrous worked between the stalks. Tongues. It rapped the glass with one nail, then another, then all of them at once, in a mad drumming that made the whole car shudder. Mara lurched across the seats and kicked open the driver's side door. She bolted into the dark, abandoning everything, guided only by the dim shape of the ruined barn against the sky. Behind her, the drumming stopped. She heard no footsteps, no pursuit, which somehow made it worse. The thing did not need to hurry. It knew the valley. It knew every ditch and stump and leaning board. It knew where she would go before she did. The barn ruin offered little shelter. Most of the walls were gone, and the roof had collapsed inward years ago, leaving a skeletal maze of beams, charred boards, and half-rotted hay matted into the earth. Mara squeezed through a gap between 2 leaning posts and crouched behind a fallen section of loft ladder, clamping both hands over her mouth. Her heart hammered so hard she tasted copper. Rain began in slow, heavy drops. They struck the broken wood around her like fingers tapping. She listened. Nothing. Then from somewhere deeper in the barn came a soft rustle, followed by the creak of weight on old timber. Not outside. Inside. Mara turned her head by inches. At the far end of the ruin, where a remnant of loft still clung to the wall, something hung from a beam. At first, she thought it was old feed sackcloth. The rain shifted. Lightning fluttered behind the clouds, not a strike, but a pulse of colorless light. In that pulse, she saw the hanging thing clearly. A man's skin. It had been flayed from crown to heel in one awful piece, opened along the back, and stretched with wire through wrists and ankles like an obscene hide curring for leatherwork. The face skin sagged downward over the front, empty eye holes weeping rainwater. The mouth hung wide, the lips drawn thin and bloodless. Every inch of it glistened. Below it, on the dirt floor, lay a mound of what remained inside. Bones in scattered heaps, dark meat hacked into ribbons, a head with no face. Mara bit into her own hand to stop the scream. Someone had died here recently. Maybe very recently. The rain had not yet washed the blood from the hay. She edged backward. A board cracked under her boot. The barn answered with silence, so complete that even the rain seemed to pause. Then from above her came a whispering rustle, dry and intimate, like a body settling in straw. Myra looked up. The scarecrow was clinging to the underside of the loft, remains directly over her. Limbs bent wrong, coat hanging downward. It had no business being able to hold itself there. Its arms were only sticks wrapped in sleeves, its body little more than bundled straw lashed to post. Yet it crouched like an insect. Its head hung upside down, burlap face inches from the dark. The many eyes beneath it rolled and blinked independently. For one frozen second, neither of them moved. Then it dropped. The impact knocked Mara flat. The smell of it hit first, a blast of mildew, blood, mold, and the sweet reek of opened bodies left in heat. Straw burst around them. One clawed hand closed around her wrist with terrible strength. Beneath the sleeve, the arm was not wood at all, but a braided mass of bones, wired together and wrapped in roots. Ribs, finger bones, vertebrae. She saw them through gaps in the cloth as the thing dragged her across the hay. She kicked at it. Her boot connected with the sack head and tore part of the burlap away. The face beneath was a nightmare of trophies. No true face existed. Only a cavity packed with stolen pieces. Human teeth pressed into mud and pitch. Eyes nested among straw. Bits of ears sewn flat against the skull-shaped frame beneath. A lower jaw that was too small, wired to a larger upper jaw that still held several gold-capped molars. And through all of it, threading like the roots of a weed through a grave, were lengths of black twine that flexed and tightened like living veins. The thing opened its mouth and made a sound not quite human and not quite animal. It was the noise a wet hand might make dragging down a wall. Mara tore free of her jacket, leaving it in its grip, and scrambled through the ruin, slipping in mud and blood. She found a broken pitchfork tined with rust, snatched it up, and spun as the scarecrow rose from the floor behind her. Its left arm dangled at an angle that should have been broken. The sleeve had torn open farther, exposing yellowed ulna and radius bound together with barbed wire. It advanced with no visible movement of legs, gliding in jerks, the post that formed its spine bumping and scraping over the earth beneath the coat. Straw leaked from its neck. Eyes blinked from the gap. Mara drove the pitchfork into its chest. The tines punched through cloth and into the packed body beneath with a brittle crunch. The scarecrow convulsed. A noise burst from it, high and furious. Black fluid, thick as tar, spattered Mara's face and hands. For an instant, she thought she had won. Then the thing seized the fork shaft and yanked her forward so hard her shoulder screamed. Its other hand caught her by the throat. The nails bit skin. Its head bent close. One of the eyes inside the burlap pushed forward until it bulged against the weave, its blue iris staring into hers. And from somewhere inside the nest of mouths came words, spoken in a chorus of mismatched voices. Stay. The word was layered, male some voices whispering, some croaking, some bubbling as if spoken through blood, all of them pleading and commanding at once. Mara slammed the lantern, still somehow clutched in one hand, against the side of its head. Glass broke, fuel splashed, flame bloomed. The scarecrow reeled back, shrieking in 20 voices. Fire climbed the burlap face. Marva ran again. She burst from the barn into rain and dark. Behind her orange, light flickered and flared among the ruined beams. She expected to hear the thing burning, collapsing, dying. But the screams became laughter, thin and crackling. Delighted. The fire went out, almost immediately in the rain. Something moved beside the old foundation. Not the scarecrow. A person. Mara nearly collapsed with relief. She staggered toward the shape, shouting, help me please." It was a man in a sheriff's jacket, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, carrying a flashlight and a shotgun. The beam cut across her face. "Jesus Christ," he said, "what happened to you?" She sobbed. Words came out broken. "Scarecrow, barn, body. Please, we have to leave right now." He grabbed her elbow and hustled her toward a pickup truck idling near the lane. "Easy. Easy now. Saw your car down here and figured some fool had come exploring. You are all right. You are all right." His calm steadied her, just enough to breathe. He got her into the passenger seat and slammed the door. Warm air blew from the vents. The truck smelled of old coffee and damp wool. Mara looked at him, trying to place whether she had seen him in town. "I did not get your call," he said, climbing behind the wheel. "But folks hear things in this valley. Storm carries more than thunder." He put the truck in gear. Mara stared out the windshield as they rolled forward. Rain sheeted through the headlights. The lane ahead seemed longer than before. "You have to call someone," she said. "There is a body in that barn." He grunted. "Would not be the first." She turned sharply. "What?" The sheriff kept his eyes on the road. Lightning flashed, showing the deep lines in his face, the raw white seam of a scar along his chin, and something else. Straw. A few dry yellow strands caught in the collar of his jacket. Her stomach tightened. "You know about it," she whispered. "Everyone around here knows about it. Then why is it still there?" His hands were huge on the steering wheel. The knuckles looked oddly stiff. Because hungry things are hard to kill. The truck began to slow. Mara looked ahead. The lane did not lead back to the road. They were circling the field. The barn loomed again through the rain on the right, the foundation on the left. And in the field's center, black against lightning, stood the scarecrow once more. Unburned, waiting. She grabbed the door handle, locked. The sheriff sighed, almost sadly. "You should have turned back in town," he said. "A warning is a mercy if taken." She recoiled from him. As she did, his profile shifted in the passing light. Not changed, revealed. The skin along his neck was too loose, too dry. It puckered where it met the jaw as if stretched over something angular beneath. At the edge of his collar, the flesh lifted from his throat a fraction, not attached as it should be, but tied. He noticed her looking. With one hand still on the wheel, he reached up and tugged at the skin beneath his chin. The whole face peeled forward. It came away from the skull in a single wet, whispering motion, turning inside out over his chest like a hood. Underneath was not muscle or bone, but a packed mass of straw glistening with dark resin. Human teeth shone from within. Several eyes opened in the hollow where the face had been. Mara screamed so hard her vision spotted. The thing in the sheriff's clothes spoke in that same layered chorus. Roads bring gifts. It swerved the truck toward the field. Mara threw herself across the seat, clawing at the lock. Her fingers slipped. The truck lurched over ruts, jarring her teeth. The creature reached for her with one straw-slick hand. She seized the shotgun from between the seats and fired point blank. The blast filled the cab with smoke and thunder. The side of the creature's head exploded in a spray of straw, teeth, and black paste. The truck jerked violently. Mara hit the door with her shoulder, and the lock snapped loose. She tumbled out into mud and weeds as the truck rolled onward riderless, plowing halfway into a ditch before striking a stump. For a second, she lay stunned in cold water, rain pounding her face. Then she heard movement on every side. Not one scarecrow, many figures rising slowly throughout the field where she had seen only broken stalks before. Some were little more than posts in rags. Others wore dresses, overalls, work shirts, church coats. Some had pumpkin sacks for heads. Some had antlers. Some had faces made from stitched animal hides. They stood between the rows, dozens of them, perhaps more, turning toward the ditch in patient unison. Mara crawled backward until her spine hit the cracked stone of the old foundation, the original one. The tall, black-coated watcher began crossing the field toward her. Its movements were deliberate now, not jerking, not gliding, walking. Each step sank deep into the wet earth. The post spine drove down like a stake. The coat dragged behind. Around it, the others remained still, like an audience letting their master approach first. She groped frantically beside her hands and found a loose chunk of foundation stone. Useless. Her flashlight, gone. Phone, gone. Shotgun, somewhere in the mud with one shell spent. Rain washed blood from the scratches on her throat and wrists. She had nowhere left to run. The scarecrow stopped 3 paces away. Up close she could see details hidden before. The coat was lined on the inside with strips of skin sewn edge to edge. Different shades, different ages, scarred skin, smooth skin, skin with freckles and tattoos and moles. One strip still held part of a nipple, another a patch of dark chest hair. The sleeves had been reinforced with finger bones stitched in rows like stays. Around the waist, a belt of braided hair hung with little charms made from kneecaps and knuckles. Its burlap head bent slightly. Then the chorus of voices came again, softer this time. Curious. Will you hang long? Myra's mind broke on the words. Something in her refused the scene before her so completely that the world narrowed to absurd specifics. The rain caught in the brim of the hat, the tiny white thread where the burlap had been mended, the way a stolen eye near the throat kept blinking rain away, though it had no lid. She became aware that she was laughing, thin, hysterical gasps, not because anything was funny, but because horror had reached a size beyond screaming. The scarecrow knelt. Its hand touched her cheek with grotesque gentleness. The nails were slick and cold. It traced the line of her jaw to her throat, feeling where skin lifted and lay loose over flesh. Assessing, appraising, like a butcher pinching fat before the cut. No, Myra whispered. The thing made that dragging wall sound again. Perhaps amusement, perhaps hunger. From within its coat, something slid into its hand. A knife, not one blade, but many pieces of blades strapped together, broken butcher steel and rusted shears, sharpened into a crude flensing tool. The handle was wrapped in dried sinew. The edge shone black in the rain. Mara surged up with a last animal burst of strength and drove the stone into the side of its knee joint. Bone cracked. The scarecrow lurched. She dove past it, scrambling over the foundation, stones toward the open mouth of the old house cellar, half hidden in weeds. She had not noticed it before. A dark square where the floor had collapsed inward. She dropped through just as the scarecrow's hand closed on her ankle. Both of them slid into the dark. The cellar was shallow, but cluttered with debris. Jars exploded under her. Shelving shattered. The scarecrow landed partly atop her, knife skittering away somewhere into the black. Mara thrashed free and crawled through stinking dampness until her hands met a dirt wall. She turned, blind, as the thing rose behind her with a rustle of straw and bones. In the cramped cellar, the smell of it was overwhelming. Rot, wet earth, tallow, sweet opened meat. A faint glimmer filtered down from above through the rain. Enough to sketch the outline of shelves, broken crockery, a root cellar door hanging from one hinge. Enough to show the scarecrow filling the space. Then another shape moved in the corner. A woman. Mara thought for one blessed second that there was another survivor. Someone hiding down here. Someone the creature had not seen. But the woman was nailed upright to the wall by stakes through her wrists and shoulders. What Mara had mistaken for clothing was the remains of her own body skin hanging in strips around her waist. Her torso had been stripped bare to red muscle. Her face was intact only on one side. The other had been peeled back, exposing teeth and cheekbone. Yet one eye still moved. It fixed on Mara with a depth of agony beyond tears. Her lips twitched. "Run," she breathed. The scarecrow whirled toward the sound, as if irritated. The woman gathered the last of herself and did something Mara never understood, not fully. She tore one arm free from the stake through sheer force of dying will, seized a rusted canning jar from the shelf beside her, and smashed it against the cellar lantern hanging dead for decades near the stairs. The glass broke. Old fuel residue and trapped gas, or some other cellar poison, ignited in a hungry blossom of fire. The world went white. Mara was thrown upward by heat and force. She hit the broken lip of the cellar, rolled through mud, and landed outside the foundation as flames roared from below. The fire spread with impossible speed through the old house remains, racing along hidden rot, dry roots, and ancient beams buried beneath weeds. The rain hissed into steam. The field came alive with screams. Not only one scream, hundreds, layered, rising from every scarecrow at once. They did not flee. They turned toward the fire as flowers turn toward sun, trembling with rage and longing. Some caught flame where sparks touched old cloth. Some simply stood and shook while smoke boiled from their seams. The tall one emerged from the cellar hole, wreathed in sparks, coat blazing at one shoulder, and fixed all its many eyes on Mara. Skin hung from its chest, where the fire had licked it, revealing the deeper frame. Not wood, human spines lashed together. Dozens, rib cages interwoven, skulls cut down and fitted into the torso like nesting bowls. It took one step toward her, then another. The woman in the cellar began to scream again, but this scream was different. Not pain, command. A voice flayed raw, but still fierce enough to shape words. "Take the face," she cried. Mara saw it then near the cellar edge, cast from the burning sheriff creature when she shot it. A sheet of human skin, gray-haired and ruined, but beneath it, something else lay folded. Another face, the burlap. She lunged, snatched it up, and almost dropped it from disgust. The sack was damp and warm like living flesh. Inside it things wriggled. The tall scarecrow stopped, every eye in its body focused on the burlap. The voices changed from hunger to panic. Mara understood only instinctively, but instinct was enough. The sack was not just decoration. It was the binding, the first face, the thing that held the rest together. With a cry raw as any animal, she thrust the burlap into the cellar fire. The valley convulsed. Every scarecrow in the field jerked, as if pulled by hooks from the inside. Their limbs snapped rigid. The chorus became one vast howl. The tall one lurched toward the flames, no longer interested in Mara, coat smoking, hands reaching. She kicked it in the chest, with all the strength she had left. It toppled into the burning cellar after the burlap. What followed was not fire alone. The earth beneath the foundation heaved. Black roots burst upward through stone. The screams became countless individual voices suddenly released into themselves, crying names, prayers, curses, fragments of unfinished last words. The other scarecrows across the field collapsed one by one, their bodies spilling bones and rot and strips of old cloth into the mud. Some thrashed like dying insects. Some simply folded inward. Mara staggered away from the blaze, half blinded by smoke and rain. Behind her something rose from the cellar flame. Not the scarecrow now, but a column of skins and straw unwinding, coming apart in layers. Faces surfaced in the fire and sank again. Arms reached out and crumbled. Eyes burst like eggs in heat. The smell was beyond bearing. Then, with a sound like a tree splitting in winter, the whole foundation caved in. Flame dropped from sight. Mud surged over the opening. The valley fell dark, except for patches of burning cloth among the rows. Mara did not stop running until dawn found her stumbling onto the paved road 5 miles away, barefoot, burned, and slick with mud. A trucker found her there and called an ambulance. The state police returned to Blackbriar Valley with county deputies, fire crews, and dogs. They found the remains of the old foundation still smoking. They found burnt bones in great quantity beneath the collapsed cellar. Human, animal, impossible to separate fully. They found shreds of skin in the barn and the ditch. And hanging from blackened fence wire, though most of it was too damaged to identify. They found Mara's car, with every window shattered inward. They found no intact bodies, no sheriff's truck, no sign of any living person having occupied the valley besides Mara. The official report called it exposure, trauma, and hallucination brought on by fear after discovering evidence of an old dumping ground or illegal burial site. Some of the remains recovered were decades old. Some were not. The local papers had a brief, ugly fascination with the story, then moved on. Mara was advised to rest, to seek counseling, to avoid discussing details publicly until the investigation closed. She did not return to urban exploration after that. For months, she woke screaming because she dreamed of dry fingers brushing her cheek. She dreamed of many eyes opening in dark corners. She dreamed of clotheslines strung across winter fields, burdened not with laundry, but with the emptied shapes of people she had once passed on roads and never looked at twice. And sometimes, in those dreams, she saw the woman in the cellar, not as she died, but as she might once have been. A farm wife perhaps, a traveler, a drifter no one missed in time, someone who had been taken and hung waiting for weather and wind to do the rest. In the dream, the woman never spoke. She only stood beyond a field of dead corn and watched Mara with one remaining eye, as if asking the question no answer could satisfy. Why did it take so long? A year passed. Then one November evening, Mara received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph. No note, no return address. The image had been taken at night from the shoulder of a road she knew too well. Flash lit the first row of dead corn and a sagging section of fence. Beyond that, in the field, stood a scarecrow. Not the same coat, not the same hat. This one wore overalls and a woman's shawl around its shoulders. Its head was a fresh burlap sack stitched with black thread. One arm was raised, and from the wrist hung something pale and long. Skin. On the back, written in a cramped, elderly hand, were only 6 words. The field grows another, every winter. Mara burned the photograph in her sink and moved apartments 2 weeks later. She changed her number. She stopped opening mail she did not recognize. She stopped sleeping with curtains open. She never learned who sent the picture, though part of her believed she already knew. The old man from Harlan's market, perhaps, or one of the porch sitters. Someone who had seen this cycle before, and knew warnings came too late for some people and too early for others. Time, despite everything, tried to blunt the valley. Memory softened around the edges. Therapy taught her how to breathe through panic. Friends, carefully chosen, brought laughter back into the rooms of her life. She even began, in private, to write again. Not exploration pieces, not travel essays, just pages of recollection she kept locked away. Because there is a particular loneliness in surviving what most people would rather turn into folklore than fact. Still, every autumn the dread returned. It arrived with the smell of leaf mold and chimney smoke, with cold rain at windows, with roadside decorations in shop displays, smiling straw men propped on porches by people who had no idea why the sight of them made Mara's pulse falter. She learned to avoid country roads after dark. She learned not to let her gaze linger on fields. 3 years after Blackbriar, she broke that rule. She was driving home from a speaking engagement in another county, later than intended, when a detour forced her onto a narrow agricultural road. The land there was unfamiliar. Rolling hills, wide harvested fields, no dead valley, no burned farm. She told herself that over and over as twilight deepened. Then she saw it near a fence line. A scarecrow, just an ordinary one perhaps. A farmer's work. Plaid shirt, floppy hat, pole for a spine. But as she passed, headlights washed over the face. Burlap, stitched mouth, one raised arm. She drove faster. In the rearview mirror, too briefly to doubt, and too clearly to deny. She saw it standing in the center of the road behind her. That night, she did not sleep. By morning, she had convinced herself it was a trick of panic, trauma, making patterns where none existed. Yet, when she went outside to leave for work, there on the doormat of her apartment lay 3 pieces of straw tied together with black thread. No footprints, no card, nothing else. She moved again. It did not help, because by then Mara understood the worst thing the valley had taught her. The field was never only one field. The roots of such a thing do not stay where they first drink blood. Hunger learns. Hunger travels in stories, in souvenirs, in the minds of those who survive it, in the faces skinned away and worn elsewhere. A scarecrow is simple to make. A post, a frame, old clothes, a head stuffed and tied. The shape of a person without the burden of being one. Give that shape enough attention, enough cruelty, enough names whispered into it in lonely fields, Enough pain fed into its silence, and perhaps silence grows teeth. Years later, long after the Briar property was fenced off and the road to it washed out, a pair of teenagers trespassed there on a dare. They went searching for remnants of the famous fire pit, and the bones that internet forums swore still surfaced after heavy rain. Only one of them returned to the highway. He was found at dawn walking barefoot in a drainage ditch, his clothes soaked through, his face scratched raw. He could not stop saying the same sentence. It was wearing him. When authorities went back with the boy's directions, they discovered no second teenager. No body, no blood, only an old fence line in the distance where something pale fluttered from the wire. The search was called off after 3 days. A hunter claimed to see a figure in the far field that winter, tall and broad in a coat too dark for snow. He fired at it with a rifle. The bullet passed through, kicking straw and dust into the air. The figure did not fall. It merely turned. The hunter swore there was a woman's face hanging from its chest, like an apron, hair frozen stiff with frost. He never hunted that county again. A postal worker on a rural route reported several mailboxes vandalized with bundles of straw rammed inside. One box contained a row of teeth wrapped in burlap. Animal teeth, the report concluded, though no one who saw them believed that. Every few years, some version of the story surfaced somewhere else. A back road in Iowa, a soybean field in Kentucky, an abandoned orchard in Pennsylvania. Always a shape in the distance, always skin where cloth should be, always the same impression left on the few who escaped. Not that they had encountered a roaming beast or a ghost tied to one place, but that they had brushed against an old patient thing still building itself, still patching its body from those unlucky enough to stop. Myra grew old with that knowledge. She never put her original account online, never made the video, never monetized the nightmare. Some stories curdle when turned toward entertainment. Some become invitations. But in notebooks and private recordings, she documented everything she remembered, every smell and phrase and image, because she feared forgetting almost as much as she feared remembering. If the thing was real, then denial only fed it more darkness to stand in unnoticed. In the final winter of her life, after a quiet illness had thinned her body and softened the force of her voice, she recorded one last message for no audience she could name. Perhaps for whoever found the notebooks. Perhaps for anyone foolish enough to go looking. She spoke from a chair beside her window, while snow fell outside and dusk gathered in the yard. If you find a field where the crows will not land, do not cross it. If you see a scarecrow facing your house where none stood the day before, leave before night. Do not take photographs. Do not bring pieces home. And if it speaks to you in a voice you know, do not answer. It uses what it keeps. It remembers how people sound. I think it remembers how they pray too. She paused for a long time, breathing shallowly. Then she added, almost too softly for the recorder to catch, "It is still waiting. That is what I need you to understand. It is never done. When Mara died, her niece inherited the boxes of journals and tapes. Most were burned unread, according to the instructions left in the will. One tape, however, had already been copied. No one knows by whom. It appears from time to time on obscure message boards and late-night radio forums, uploaded under different names before being removed. People who listen usually dismiss it as fiction, a creepypasta, an elaborate horror monologue. Some praise the atmosphere. Some say the old woman's voice sounds too genuine. A few swear that if you increase the volume in the last minute, beneath the room tone and the hiss of the tape, you can hear something outside her window in the snow. A dry knocking, 3 taps, then a chorus of voices whispering from the yard. And somewhere, far from any road kind enough to be mapped correctly, there is still a field with something standing in it. Sometimes it wears a black coat, sometimes overalls, sometimes a dress stiff with age and weather. Its hat changes, its height changes, the arrangement of trophies on its body changes. Yet the posture remains the same, head slightly bent as if listening, one arm lower than the other, a patient angle to the shoulders, the suggestion that if you looked away and back again, it might be closer. When travelers break down nearby, they often think the shape in the field is just a postmarker or an old farm dummy left to rot. They may even laugh in relief at the sight of something so ordinary in an otherwise lonely place. They may walk toward it, waving a flashlight, calling out for help, grateful to find any sign of human work in the dark. If they get close enough, they begin to notice the details. The coat is not cloth where it ripples at the hem. The hat brim drips, though it has not rained. The fingers are too long and end in crescents that shine. The burlap over the face stirs, as though something beneath it is swallowing. And hanging from the fence nearby, or from a line stretched between 2 dead trees, there are shapes moving gently in the wind. Pale, empty, human in outline, drying. By then, it is too late to turn around, because the field has already seen them, because the watcher has been hungry a very long time, because somewhere under the sack and straw and borrowed skins, there is still a hollow made to hold more. And even now, while roads darken and engines fail, and rain begins to whisper over dead rows of corn, it stands with all the patience of winter itself, waiting for the next footstep in the mud, the next frightened voice calling hello into the dark, the next warm body foolish enough to believe that some lonely things are harmless just because they stand still. It is waiting now. It will still be waiting when the wind changes. It will still be waiting after the last porch light goes out. It will still be waiting long after this story ends. Thank you for listening. Please like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of